probably doesn't need a lot of introduction, but his name is Gregg Braden, and he's written many books coming out of originally a background as a geologist through a corporate arena, and now a real leader in thinking a new way about ourselves and our evolution as a species on this planet. So he's a 2018 nominee award for the prestigious Templeton Award. He's really, you would go on with the bio, but he's also just an amazing, heartfelt, good guy as well. So he's the kind of guy who not only writes the great books, but he also is super sweet behind the scenes. So we're really pleased and honored to be here today with Gregg Braden. Welcome, Gregg.
Oh, Stephen, I am thrilled to be with you. I want to say right up front, I want to thank everyone behind the scenes at the Shift Network for making this possible. And I want to thank all of our viewers for taking the moment to tune in and check this out today. I appreciate every one of you. Thank you.
Great. Gregg, it's always great to have a little bit of backstory. People know you, certainly familiar with your name, but they may not know, what brought you into this work of really, the leading edge of human potential?
Wow. So we start with the easy questions first. I'm a scientist. I'm a degree geologist, as you mentioned. I have a strong background in the life sciences, invertebrate biology, molecular biology. Originally, I was going to be an oceanographer and study all of the ocean sciences. And, as different as those things seem to be from what we're talking about today, for me, it was actually the perfect foundation. The science, my background in science has helped me to delve into the scientific research and the publications, Stephen, that are often in very obscure places, to bring to the forefront the new discoveries of science that are overturning 150 years of what we have been taught about ourselves and our relationship to the world. So as a scientist, I began applying these principles in the corporate world. And it was good for individual corporations. But as I looked at my path, every one of my journeys through the corporations during a time of crisis, during the first energy crisis in the 1970s, it was during the Cold War crisis of the 80s, the information sharing crisis in the 1990s. And what I found was that my strength was in solving problems and bringing applications to the forefront that could really make a difference in terms of the way these problems are being solved. So in a very real sense, I'm doing the same thing now. Instead of corporations, we're looking at consciousness. We're looking at how we can bring into our everyday lives the discoveries that change the way we think about ourselves and the way we solve our problems, and do it in a way that is healthy, a way that is honest, that is truthful, that is factual. It helps us to become better people. Ultimately, Stephen, it helps us to create a better world. And I can't think of a better reason to marry this science and this ancient wisdom together than just that. So that's a long answer to a short question.
No, well, I think one of the things I really appreciate about you in that solution orientation, that you're interested in solving problems, is that you don't see these crises as debilitating. You're just like, oh, another crisis. Let's figure out a solution to that. In fact, after the last election, I was a little bit bummed out. We had a conversation, and you were so uplifting afterwards. And I think that perspective where you're saying, oh, every crisis is an opportunity for evolution. And so whether it's an environmental crisis or political crisis or an economic crisis, these breaking down of old patterns is really part of the design of how evolution works. So let's talk about some of these new discoveries and how they relate to getting through the crisis we're in.
Well, the new discoveries that we're going to focus on in this particular course are the discoveries about us. There are many other discoveries about the Earth and about our relationship to the Earth, but I want to really zero in on the new discoveries about the human body, Stephen, and our origin particularly. The new discoveries that are telling us that evolution, as Darwin presented it, is not our story. The evidence no longer supports evolution as we've come to understand it in the past. That is powerful because it frees us to look into the new directions for where the evidence is leading. And what's made all this possible, Stephen, is I love to say this, what used to be science fiction is now science fact. And if I'll just speak right to our viewers, remember Jurassic Park? We all thought that was science fiction when it came out. But now what we can do is very similar to what was done in Jurassic Park. In the film, they were able to extract DNA from the fossilized remains of ancient forms of life. In the movie, they reconstituted them, brought them to life. We haven't gone quite that far yet, I don't think. But we can extract the DNA from the forms of life that were believed to be our ancestors and compare that DNA to us today. And lo and behold, it's telling us that we didn't come from these forms of life, as we've been led to believe, number one. Number two, the way that the DNA has formed that gives us our uniqueness as humans, our ability for sympathy, empathy, compassion, self-regulation. The way that DNA has come together is not the product of evolution alone. And the scientists are saying this. They're saying something else happened to fuse and tweak and modify the DNA in very complex ways in a very brief period of time that makes us who we are today. So that opens the door to new possibilities, and it appears that we are intended to embrace these extraordinary capabilities of things like deep intuition on demand, the ability to regulate our longevity hormones, our anti-aging enzymes on demand, the ability to regulate our immune system, super perception, super learning, the ability to create resilience to change in our personal lives. And, you know, Stephen, I know our viewers know this. The world is changing. Our lives are changing. And it's hard to draw a boundary. Where does one end and the other begin? We're all going through this. I'm going through it. You're going through it. So the ability to create resilience so that we can embrace this change in a healthy way. And here's the key: to thrive in the new world that's emerging rather than just surviving and getting by. So these are just some examples of what the implications of the science now are leading to. That's why I'm so excited to share this.
Yeah, some very intriguing things in what you just shared. So it's not that we're not evolving; it's that you were saying there's another factor that's coming in, which is like the feedback mechanism, that we're feeding back with our consciousness, our beliefs, and I would love for you to share a little bit more about why that's so important. Because we most of us grew up with a paradigm from science where we're essentially the victims of our genes, and we're just kind of propelled forward. If we live or die, that determines whether it goes on to the next person. But in a way, you're kind of stuck with what you got.
Well, this is where the new discoveries, Stephen, you would think that people would be excited about the new discoveries, and the average person is. But I want to share there is a reluctance, and in many cases a resistance to sharing these discoveries in the mainstream. So you're not seeing this in mainstream classrooms, mainstream textbooks, mainstream documentaries on the one hand, and on the other hand, these discoveries change the way we think about ourselves, the way that we can heal our bodies, the way that we create our relationships. So that's why this information is so powerful. That's why it's so important. We're living in a time when the world is changing so quickly in ways that we've never seen. Stephen, we've never taken 8 billion people and mushed them together into a society and a culture that's globalized the way it is today. When everything was separated in the past, it was a little easier to have your own beliefs and your own religion, your own culture, and all of those things. Now that everything is being globalized, we've never been taught how to really merge this globalization into our personal lives. So as we begin to think differently about ourselves, here's the key, and this is what's so powerful. The better we know ourselves, Stephen, the less we fear change. The better we know ourselves, the better equipped we are to deal with whatever life brings to our doorstep. The better we know ourselves, the more empowered, the more competent we feel, the greater our esteem, self-esteem. As we go into the world, the better we know ourselves through these extraordinary capabilities. Now, I just mentioned a few. The better we know ourselves as we're able to implement these extraordinary abilities in our everyday lives. We live extraordinary lives. And I think that's what's important here. So it is a very different way of thinking from what we've been led to believe. And you just mentioned a couple of the differences. Darwin's theory, introduced in 1859, suggests that we live in a world of competition, conflict, struggle, and scarcity. And people say to me all the time, Greg, 1859, that was a long time ago. This is 21st century. What difference does it make? And it's a good question. But when we think about our world, our society, the foundation of our society was actually put in place during the time when that theory came out. So our society, our economic system is based upon competition, conflict, scarcity. Our economic system is based upon these things. And even beyond that, you and I, these ideas are so deeply ingrained into our subconscious, they show up in our personal relationships, in our most intimate, our most passionate relationships. When we're up against the wall and someone that knows us really well pushes those buttons that only they know so well, the way we respond when we lash out in the subconscious patterns of anger, and we say things that we wish we hadn't said, those are all examples of how deeply ingrained these ideas are within us. And as we become aware of these things, then we can heal those perceptions, those false perceptions. And we begin to choose our relationships different. We begin to choose our friendships different, the kinds of jobs that we choose. Our self-esteem changes because we go from being led to feeling insignificant and powerless in life to being empowered and confident in the choices that we make. And I think that is the key to moving forward. That is a form of evolution. That is an evolution of consciousness, not the physical body. If you compare the physical bodies that we have today to the first modern humans that emerged 200,000 years ago, you pretty much can't tell us the same. We are essentially the same body proportions, same cranial proportions. So you can't really tell us apart. So it's not that the evolution of the physical body, it's the evolution of the capacity, the potential that we have. And I think that's really where the action is. That's where the new frontiers in science are leading us. And that's what I'm able to share in a really concise way through the program we're offering, breaking each of those potentials down, each of those abilities, and dedicating an entire episode of the course to one of those capabilities.
Tell me a little bit more about some of those abilities and what you've discovered from a scientific standpoint, because there's a lot of new terrain that we're always showcasing in the Shift Network, and I'd love to get your more scientific lens on it.
One of I don't want to be really technical, but I'm going to share some of the science. And then I do want to say everything that we're talking about now, this isn't Gregg's theory. This isn't Gregg's hypothesis. This is based upon peer-reviewed science. So it's science that has been researched, published, circulated among the peers in the scientific community, and published in what are often obscure scientific journals. So the mainstream, it's not like you're going to see it in the Wall Street Journal or Rolling Stone or something like that. Every once in a while, a little tidbit makes it through. So the things that we're sharing, they are acknowledged in the scientific community. They're just not embraced in mainstream. And so I want to be really clear about that. One of the things that was discovered when we began looking at the DNA, now that we have the ability to look at the DNA in ways that we haven't in the past, human chromosome number 2, it's a perfect example. It's the second largest chromosome in the human body. It's about 8% of every cell. And human chromosome number 2 is responsible, and the genes within human chromosome number 2 are responsible for the neocortex in the brain. That is the largest part of the brain. It's the part of the human brain that gives us our humanness, that gives us our ability for empathy, sympathy, compassion, the self-regulation of so many different aspects of our bodies. And I think this is really where the action is, Stephen. We are the only form of life that can sit down in a moment in time and say, in this moment, I choose to self-regulate. I choose to awaken the immune response, a powerful immune response in my body. I choose to awaken those anti-aging enzymes in my body. I choose to embrace deep states of intuition beyond everyday spontaneous intuition. We all have experiences where, maybe you go to pick up the telephone to call someone and they're already on the phone before you dial the number. So to make that happen, that is a subconscious intuition that led us to pick up the phone in that exact moment. And when that happens, we say, well, that was really cool. I wonder if I can do that again. Because the universe just kind of dropped that on us. But the key is, how do you have that deep connection when you need it the most? When you're faced with a situation in life where we have no point of reference, you can't Google the answer. You can't ask a friend or a family member. And I actually have friends right now that are going through healthcare decisions. Over the holidays, they took some time, went to the doctor, self-care. They found out that there were issues in their bodies, and the doctor is saying, you need to follow a certain line of treatment, but it's very foreign to the way that they think. So they're asking a question, what should I do? And everyone they ask tells them something different. Their parents tell them one thing, friends tell them another thing, doctor tells them another thing. What do you do when something like that happens? And I'm not saying we'll have a health crisis, but I believe every one of us is going to face something in our lives where we will have nowhere to turn and no one to ask except within. How do you awaken the intuition when you need it the most, when the conditions are least favorable, to listen to what that guidance is really all about? Well, this is where the new discoveries come in. 1991, 40,000 specialized cells were recognized in the human heart in a way they'd never been recognized before, Stephen. They're called sensory neurites. They are essentially brain-like cells, but they're not in the cranial brain. They're in the heart. Here's the thing. They think independently of the brain. They feel independently. They remember independently. They sense independently and have their own intelligence. So when we're looking for that deep intuition, what we're really doing is learning to tap, to consciously activate our relationship to those 40,000 cells and the wisdom that they hold. And it is beyond simply wishing or hoping or guessing. There is a direct inherent knowledge within those cells of what is true and right for us only, us and our bodies. We can't know what's right for someone else, but we can know really, really well what's right for us. So when we have those questions of healthcare choice or relationship, should I stay or should I go? Or a job, should I stay or should I go? Any kind of question, there's this single source that is always with us. It is always with us. I don't share this a lot, but part of my background is Southeastern Cherokee. And in my Cherokee tradition, there's actually a word that doesn't exist in the English language for that wisdom. It's called Shante Ishta. It means the single eye of the heart. How do we tap that single eye of the heart? So that's just one example of what we have access to through the new discoveries that are telling us that these relationships exist, but they're going beyond that. They're showing us the techniques of how we actually tap that wisdom.
Let's talk a little bit about heart-brain harmonization, since that's something that we described on the page and it relates to what you're sharing, so that you have this heart intelligence that then can be synchronized with your brain with certain practices.
Right. Well, this is a new language that is describing a very ancient relationship that our ancestors, many indigenous traditions have known for a long time. These 40,000 cells that we have in our heart, as I mentioned, they operate independently of the cranial brain. So we've been taught, I'm a scientist, and I've been taught that the brain is where the action is. The brain is the master organ in the body. And I work with other people, musicians, artists, very right brain people. They say, the heart is where the action is. The brain is secondary. And the reality is that both of these organs work together. They work in harmony. And we have the ability to consciously establish an even stronger relationship between our heart and our brain, to harmonize the heart and the brain, two separate organs, but we harmonize them into a single potent system that becomes the doorway for so many of the potentials that I've just mentioned, the longevity and the immune response and intuition and super learning and super perception and resilience and all those things. As different as they are from one another, they all result from our ability to harmonize the heart and the brain. And the techniques are very well known for many people. The question is, once you get to that place, once you establish the heart-brain harmony, now what? What do you do? And this is where we have the opportunity to take these techniques even further. I'm in my mid-60s right now. I've spent much of my adult life, over 40 years of my adult life, studying indigenous traditions and going to the places and the monasteries and the nunneries and with the shamans and the healers and the monks and the nuns from different cultures, Stephen, to understand what it is they know that we've forgotten or that we're only beginning to understand for the first time here in the West, and how they've learned to apply these things in their lives. Is a perfect example. Science began about 300 years ago. We say science began during the time of Isaac Newton, 1700s. And for 300 years, science has been asking the question, are we separate from everything else or is everything connected? And science through quantum physics has only recently arrived at the understanding that everything is connected. So they're saying, okay, it's connected. Now what? What do we do with that connection? How do we access that connection? On the one hand. And on the other hand, our indigenous ancestors, their wisdom goes back over 5,000 years. They began with the understanding that everything is connected. They didn't take centuries to prove it. They said, of course, everything is connected. Now, what do we do with that connection? So for over 5,000 years, our ancestors have been exploring how to apply that connection in our lives in a healthy way. And that's just one example of this merging of science and spirituality in a really, really beautiful way. And how we can bring these things to bear in our everyday lives. Once we understand this connection within ourselves, with other people, and with our world, then we can begin applying this in our relationships, in our jobs, in our careers, and in our healing, and much more.
Well, let's go into some of those really practical areas, since I think what you're sharing is very exciting for everybody. And it's like, okay, how do we make it real? So let's focus maybe first on thoughts and belief systems. I know that's very foundational to how do we shift our whole system, that if we have erroneous beliefs, we're kind of running negative programs that then get programmed into our health, our lifespan, everything else. So what can you share about how do we shift those kind of some of those core negative or undermining beliefs?
One of the things I found, Stephen, in working with live audiences all over the world in the last 40 years is that I think people are willing to shift the way they think or what they believe if they're given a reason to do so. It takes work to change our belief system. It takes a lot of work. So this is why I think where the science comes in. When we can see through the science the mechanism of how something works, then there's a shift that begins within us that allows us, we have to do one of two things. Once the science shows us the relationships, we either discount what we've seen, we say, oh, we don't believe that, or we embrace it, and our belief system has to change to embrace that new discovery. Now, those are conscious beliefs, but I think what you're talking about and what a lot of us are dealing with are unconscious beliefs that we didn't choose consciously, that are part of, it's still within us through our society, our culture, our parents, since our childhood. And this is where this relationship between the heart and the brain come in. Because if you're going to shift a subconscious belief, we must communicate with the subconscious in a language that the subconscious recognizes. It makes perfect sense to me. So to communicate with that language, once we harmonize the heart and the brain, that is like a doorway. And that doorway now is available to us for many things that we can choose. We can choose to use that doorway to reprogram subconscious patterns, and we'll have a course module on that. We can use that doorway for deep intuition, to awaken deep intuition. We can use that doorway to enhance learning and perception. And these are techniques U.S. military, intelligence services are actually using these techniques to sharpen the perceptions of the people that they employ, military, before they go into the battlefield. But we can use it in our everyday lives. So it's all about, once we create this doorway, how do we walk through the doorway and awaken these individual capacities, these individual potentials in our lives? So if we're going to change the way we think and the way we believe to access that subconscious pattern, we now have direct access without hypnosis. We have direct access to go into our subconscious and shift those patterns and do it in a really, really healthy way. This all comes back to the key word, Stephen, self-regulation. We are taught that we're powerless and helpless and insignificant beings in the world. And I got to tell you, from the time I was a kid, it never made sense that we would find ourselves plopped down this beautiful world without the ability to somehow communicate with ourselves in the world and without the ability to regulate our relationship to the world. So our indigenous ancestors now are telling us, yes, you do have those capabilities. The science is showing us the mechanism to awaken them. And when you bring those together, when you bring together the science that shows us the nuts and bolts and the wisdom that shows us how do you do it, then we can embrace these in our everyday life. We can do this in our living rooms, in our everyday lives. You don't have to go to a monastery in the mountaintop halfway around the world. You can, and it's fun to do it, but we don't have to do that any longer. This is contemporary mysticism is what we're dealing with now.
Love it. And that's really at the foundation of the new story, the new human story that you're talking so eloquently about. Well, let's there's a couple of areas that we said we would talk about that I think would be interesting. So one of them is mirror neurons, and how does that relate to what you've been sharing? What are the insights there that allow us to shift these core patterns much more rapidly?
You know, Stephen, this is one of those discoveries. The thinking was, because we are so far along in medical science, and we've been doing, amazing organ transplants and things successfully for so long, the thinking has been that we are successful with all of these things because we pretty much know everything there is to know about these things. So it was a surprise as recently as 2004 when a new discovery was made of specialized neurons in very specific places in the human brain that are called mirror neurons. Now, I know our viewers are familiar with neurons in terms of brain function and the term firing. When a neuron is activated, we say that neuron is firing. Here's the thing about the mirror neurons. They fire when we're having an experience. So if we're on the playing field, playing soccer, or if we are playing a musical instrument or, with friends doing something we really enjoy. Our mirror neurons fire when we're having the experience. But here's the key. They also fire when we witness someone else having the experience. That was the discovery. In other words, these neurons, our brain doesn't know the difference between us having the experience and us witnessing the experience. I'm going to invite our viewers just to think about that for a minute, and how powerful that could be in your life. Because our ancestors, the great teachers of the past, for example, if they wanted, I'm just going to use a yogic master, for example. I studied a yogic master, his name was Milarepa, when I was spending time in Tibet. When Milarepa wanted to help his students go beyond the limitations of their mind, he would demonstrate something in their presence that they believed was impossible. And by him doing something that was impossible and them seeing it happen, it freed them in their subconscious and their conscious beliefs. It freed them from those limitations of the past and unleashed an inner potential within them so they could go forward in their lives and accomplish things that they had believed they couldn't do. So that was a mystic in Tibet almost 1,000 years ago. The same principle applies to us today. When you witness, I'm looking right at our viewers. When you witness a healing, for example, in the body of a person that was told they would never heal, when you witness that healing, and maybe you're seeing it through a real-time scan or a sonogram, or maybe it's a physical healing that you can see. When you see another person have that experience, it changes. Your mirror neurons free something within you, and it changes your perception, and it says to your body, maybe this or something even greater is possible for me. And this is the power of mirror neurons, one of the things that make them so powerful in our lives. And interestingly, this is very, very cool. Where we find these mirror neurons is in the part of the brain that is made possible by the fusion of the DNA for human chromosome number 2 that we talked about earlier. So whatever happened 200,000 years ago that was not through an evolutionary process that gave us human chromosome 2, that gave us a brain 50% larger than our nearest primate relatives, that gave us the neocortex, now it is also what makes these mirror neurons possible in our lives.
Well, it sounds like it's particularly important to expose yourself to new human potential. So watching videos of healers or surrounding yourself with extrasensory perception. So part of that, then, that connects with the core concept around the new human story. We have to witness other people in different aspects of the new human story so we can program ourselves to know we're capable of it.
Absolutely, Stephen. And there's so much potential. We're steeped in a story of helplessness and powerlessness. And I've said this is the third time. I won't say it anymore. But it's so important because based upon that story, that is where our self-esteem comes from, and that is where our view of life itself comes from. We're living in a world, and I'm just going to be very honest with you and our viewers. We're living in a world where we're witnessing atrocities that are just unthinkable and unspeakable. And they are only possible because of the way people have been led to think of themselves. They hate, for example. They hate crimes based upon religion, based upon the color of our skin, based upon our sexual orientation, the cyberbullying of young people in school, and the way that our children perceive that cyberbullying. Do they believe what they're told on Facebook from other people, from their friends and their peers, or are they strong enough to know that what those people are saying is not really true and does not really apply to them? The answer to all of these things, as different as they are from one another, the common theme is it all comes down to the way that you and I, viewers, the way we have been led to think about life in general, about human life, about our relationship to our world and to our bodies. And that's based upon 300 years of false assumptions of science. New discoveries have just overturned 300 years of that science, and those discoveries are simply not trickling down into the mainstream. But this is why it's so important. Stephen, if we're ever going to heal the hurt that is ravishing our families and dividing our communities and polarizing our nations right now. So we're taking this from personal to global and back to personal. If we're ever going to heal that hurt, we've got to go to the core beliefs that precipitate that hurt. Anything else is a Band-Aid. And they're well-intentioned Band-Aids. Legislation helps. And it's good to have new laws, good to have new rules. But the core feelings is where these things begin. So to create the kind of world that we know is possible, create the kind of families that we know is possible, create the kind of life as an individual that I know is possible for me and my family and my community. This is why I think it's so important for us to at least be aware of the new discoveries. I would never attempt to convince or persuade anyone of anything. I am passionate about sharing the new discoveries. And my feeling is when the facts are clear, the choices become obvious. Mm-hmm. And the more choices we have, I think the stronger we become as individuals and as a community and as a society. So it's one of those places where science and spirituality come together in a really beautiful way. And it's hard to draw the line, Stephen, between our personal lives and the lives of our community and our society and what's happening between nations because everything is so connected now. Does that make sense if I say it that way?
It does. Well, I mean, our consciousness is the program that runs the whole show. So in a way, we practice with ourselves and we extend that out to the larger world so we actually have a healthier system. Well, let's come back to, we mentioned a few of these really practical areas earlier, kind of a suggestive way, but I want to dive a little deeper into, you mentioned immune response or longevity and how if we want to enter into a right state where we can expand our lifespan or improve our health, share a little bit more about the how there. And I know there's something around the gamma state that's very significant as well.
Well, all of those three very different things. This all comes back to self-regulation. What we know is that we are imbued with the ability to consciously regulate all the things you've mentioned and much more, Stephen. And we do it through the relationship between our heart and our brain and the emotions that we choose to create. So, for example, you mentioned longevity. 2009, Nobel Prize was awarded to Elizabeth Blackburn and her co-discoverers, Carol Greider from Stanford University. Elizabeth Blackburn is from Stanford University, for the discovery of an enzyme that was always found near the ends of the DNA in the cells, but they weren't really sure what this enzyme was all about. The purpose of this enzyme, it was discovered, was to first stop the erosion of the ends of the DNA that actually protect the rest of the DNA as we go through the cell division. Every time a cell divides, the DNA has to remain intact for each cell division. And there's a portion of the DNA is called telomeres, or telomeres, it's pronounced both ways, right at the end of the DNA that does just that. It's a protective cap. And when that cap begins to erode through stress, through poor nutrition, and they say that just through aging, as that cap begins to erode, the cells don't divide properly, and we call that age aging, we call it senescence, we call it illness, eventually we call it death. So the discovery in 2009 of the enzyme that actually stops that erosion, that begins to heal the ends of the DNA and actually lengthens the cap, reversing the aging. It is effectively reversing the biomarker for aging on the DNA level. That discovery in 2009 has led to an entire new science of longevity in terms of how the things that we can do in our bodies and in our daily lives, the choices we can make to protect and heal those caps on the end of the DNA. And one of the most powerful agents of that healing we've already talked about in this program, it is the harmonization of the heart and the brain in a very precise way that relieves the stress. And the stress on the DNA is one of the greatest factors that prevents longevity. So what they're finding now is not only can we stop the erosion and the breakage of this portion of the DNA, but it's possible to heal the damage that's already occurred in older people, and then actually begin to lengthen those caps. And those caps are what scientists now call, they are the biomarkers. They determine the age of the cell. So they're literally reversing the age of the cell. And they've done this in laboratory experiments, and now with mice, for example. And now the humans are showing a tremendous promise. The same thing is happening. You can actually measure how much your telomeres increase in length over a period of time. We have the ability to do that now. So in response to dietary changes that we'll talk about, to lifestyle changes, and to the harmonization of the heart and the brain and what we do after we're in that state. So that's one piece. You mentioned the super learning. When I was in school back in the 50s, 60s, and part of the early 70s. And we looked at brain states, Stephen. We had, alpha, theta, beta, and delta, and that was about it. And there's a new brain state that is what's new in the textbooks. It's called the gamma state. It is such a fast, if you look at the waves of the gamma state, it is such a fast wave. It is a state of heightened perception, deepened intuition. It is an antidepressant, natural antidepressant. But what the science have also found is that when they're dealing with this gamma state, it is a brain wave that actually is activating all of the other brain waves, including theta. And theta is where a lot of the healing comes from. So when we consciously move into this gamma state, not only are we enhancing our perceptions, but we are also activating that part of our brain, of the brain state that allows the deep healing that we see, but we are conscious while we're doing it. So in the gamma state, we have heightened perceptions. You are able to retain and recall memory in a way that typically we cannot. For example, if you've seen Jason Bourne, any Jason Bourne fans out there, Matt Damon is in the Jason Bourne series, where he is an agent that has been trained to heighten his perception. He can walk into a room, his eyes look around the room, he walks out, and immediately he can recall. He knows where every wall plug is. He knows where every piece of art. He knows what kind of wood is on the doors. He knows what the paint looks like. And it's possible because his eyes took in the information, just as our eyes always do. The key is his brain was taught to retrieve the information, and this is part of what the gamma allows us to do. It is a heightened state of perception. Now, I'm not suggesting that it's important for us to walk in the room and know what the room looks like, perhaps, but this goes to...
We can apply it to whatever we happen to be passionate about.
Well, absolutely. If you're a musician, I'm a guitar player, for example, and I do this all the time, trying to learn the music that other people have played. So if I could watch a guitarist, a very well-known guitarist who passed a few years ago, his name is Michael Hedges, and I've written about him in some of my other books. He's a Windham Hill artist. I was fascinated. He blew away every preconceived idea that I'd ever had of what a guitar was all about because I was trained classically. So when I would watch Michael Hedges in concert, I learned to think the way his fingers were thinking, and then I could apply that in my own life. If you're a student and you're studying and you're trying to retain large amounts of information, especially in the sciences, There are just so many different ways. Just in everyday conversation, Stephen, this is so fascinating to me. When we listen to another person in conversation, often we are listening with the intent to respond. As we're listening to someone else speak, we're formulating in our mind how we're going to respond rather than listening to really consciously, from a heartfelt perspective, hear what that person is sharing. Okay? And we'll talk about this in our course as well. It's a conscious listening. So when we're in that gamma state, it opens us up for the ability to hear consciously and go beyond simply sympathizing, but actually to create the empathy and ultimately the compassion. And that's a sequence. We must have sympathy before we can have empathy. We must have empathy before we can have compassion. The gamma state allows us to do that and much more. So it is a heightened state of awareness that is accessible through a natural technique, a natural process that the studies have shown that babies do this all the time. So it appears to be something that we've already known, that we are conditioned out of as we go through life. And so for many people, that's why it's so familiar and so easy to get back into these states. But yes, the gamma state is another one of those things. We can self-regulate our ability to access that gamma state.
Well, let's go a little bit into the big picture arena now. So, this has a big impact on how we view ourselves on the planet. You've referenced this a few times, but really, how does this shift our sense of ourselves as a human race?
Well, it all begins with us as individuals. I think there's a single question, Stephen, that forms the basis for every choice that we will ever make in our lives. Every choice of every relationship, who we say yes to as a partner, who we say no to, who we invite into our homes, who we invite into our lives as adults, who we invite into our bed. I mean, that's a big thing for us to think about. It's all based upon the way that we answer this question, who am I? Every decision we've ever made, every choice that we have ever made, every choice of health and healing and job and career, every decision choice, every issue that has ever come to us in our lives, the way we deal with these, it's all based upon the way we answer a single question. That question is simply, who am I? Who am I? We solve our problems, we live our lives, we heal our bodies, we choose our relationships based upon the way we answer that question. We as a society have been conditioned through a human story, an old human story that says we are insignificant, that we are powerless, that we are helpless, and that life has been devalued because we're taught that life is the result of an accident in biology. The story of evolution tells us that it's just purely by chance that just the right atoms came together in just the right proportions to form just the right molecules at just the right time and just the right temperatures and just the right conditions to allow those simple forms of life to evolve to what we are today. That is a relatively sterile way of thinking about life, and it leaves us with a feeling that really, while it's interesting, that there really isn't something so powerfully special about life. And because of that thinking subconsciously, Stephen, it's reflected in the world around us. We could only have the war and the atrocities. We could only have the abuse of other people, domestic abuse, and young people abusing their bodies through drugs and through all the different ways it's happening. That would never happen in a world where we are taught to value human life differently. The science now, the new discoveries, are giving us the reason to shift our thinking. They're saying, and I'm going to be very honest about this, I don't know what did happen. And science doesn't know what did happen. But this is the key. We now know that evolution, as we've been taught, is not our story. That frees us to now follow the evidence to the new story that it's telling, rather than attempting to force the evidence to fit into a preconceived story, which is what we've done for 150 years. So for 150 years, every iota of evidence, all the fossils, all the DNA, all the the cave paintings and the relics and whatever we have, the physical evidence, the attempt through academia and through science has been to force it into the Darwin's theory of evolution, into the evolutionary family tree, and say, these beings descended from these beings and so on. That's very different than allowing the evidence to lead to whatever story it's telling. So my invitation, and one of the reasons I think this is such a powerful body of information, is to free our young people from the shackles of being tied to this old story and allow them to follow the evidence to wherever it's going to lead. So I'm not suggesting we throw the old stories out, but I think we owe it to ourselves to share both the new and the old story together to our young people and say, this is what we know, this is what we've discovered. I think about this all the time, Stephen. What would it be like to have an entire new generation of young people from the moment they begin learning about themselves to understand that they are empowered to self-regulate so many facets of their own being, that they are connected with themselves, they're connected with other people, they're connected with the world. They live in a world of nature based upon cooperation, where nature likes them and wants them to succeed. What would that world look like? I don't think we're going to have to wait long, because I think we're about to find out a new generation is embracing these new discoveries, and we're the bridge. We are the bridging generation that is now making it possible for the young people to embrace the new discoveries while we still have 1 foot in the old world based upon those the old beliefs. So it's a really interesting time, and that's why I think this information is so powerful. For the first time in a very long time, in 300 years, we have the scientific reasons to shift what we have been taught about ourselves, and now we have the indigenous wisdom that shows us how to apply that shift in our lives so that we can become better people. We can become the best people we can be and create the best world possible for ourselves and our children. And I think ultimately that's really what this work is all about.
I've heard the phrase evolution by choice, not by chance, and I think that's really right at the foundation of a lot of what you're sharing with us. So we're very excited that you've partnered up with us to create this program. It's called Human by Design, Unleashing Your Higher Potential for Self-Healing, Longevity, and Super Perception. So what Gregg has really made so clear in this hour together already is just that the ability to self-regulate with these more advanced techniques can affect everything from our belief systems to our immune systems down to the telomeres that are determining our lifespan, and really has a huge impact on our quality of life. So there's the way in which a lot of things that have felt like we're just stuck with, we actually can get in there and tinker with and change and evolve and shift and make new possibilities happen. And to do that with the grounding in science actually helps us to know that it's possible, because sometimes if science is telling us one strong story that's not possible, then we're going to take that in. And so having the science combined with the different kinds of transformative disciplines allows you to make shifts more rapidly. So you can see this program at the web URL humanbydesigncourse.com. Again, that's humanbydesigncourse.com. It's going to be a 6-week program, and it's going to go into some of these techniques that we've talked about today about how to harmonize your heart and brain, and how to develop self-regulatory skills, and how to work with the gamma state, and how to get into beyond these isolated nation-state belief systems into really believing and feeling ourselves as one human family, and how to basically just really become more better and more skilled at empowering yourself so that you can be a radiant example of what we're all living into. So this program doesn't have any prerequisites. It's really for anybody who's interested and passionate about growth and exploration and new possibilities. And and Gregg has always been probably one of the most skilled people out there at taking breakthrough scientific discoveries and making them simple and fun and practical. And so you'll both get access to the new science and you really learn how to apply it in your life. So Gregg, I'd love for you to share a little bit more about the program and then take us on a tour of what people can
Thank you. I'm excited just hearing you share about the program as a listener. So thank you for that. It's a multimedia presentation. It's not just me speaking. It's very visual, a strong visual component. And for me, there is a lot of science out there that's telling us the new discoveries, and then they stop. And I always feel a little shorted by that, Stephen. I think, okay, here's the discovery. Now what? What do I do? So in this course, I wanted to go beyond simply sharing the discovery. We will do that. And I want to be really clear. I'm going to share the science, but it is not a tremendously technical course. You don't have to be a scientist. But the science is actually very simple. Science is all about the relationships. So I'm going to share the new relationships. I won't use a lot of technical jargon. You won't need any special scientific knowledge. And once that science, that foundation is there, then it makes sense to apply that in our own bodies and to apply it in our lives. And that's why I've designed this course the way I have, breaking out each of these potentials, the longevity and the super learning and resilience, into a single module so that I can share the science. And then let's learn the techniques. And let's find out, what works and what doesn't work. And the things that don't work, let's stop doing them. And the things that work really well, let's do a lot of them in our lives. So it is a very visual program. Hopefully it's a lot of fun. It's fun for me to share this because it's a new story. There was an American author that said, who are we but the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves and believe? And think about that. Who are we but the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves and believe about ourselves? Well, there's a new story that's emerging, and it is a beautiful, powerful story of self-regulation. It is a powerful story of human potential. And it tells us that we are absolutely not what we've been told, and we are much, much more than we've ever been led to believe. I can't think of a more exciting way to share these 6 weeks together. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about that, Stephen. I appreciate it.
Well, I encourage you to go to the page at humanbydesigncourse.com and really give this a good, thorough read. You can read through the modules or Human by Design and Coherence, the key to maximum human potential and thriving in life's extremes, deep intuition on demand, really taking these breakthrough understandings and making them practical in your life. So not only do you get these 6 class sessions with Gregg, it's going to be on video, so there's that interactive component. It'll be a lot of fun since we create a real global community around these courses. You also get video recordings afterwards. You'll have time in small groups if you want. You can do weekly exercises at home. You get MP3s, so if you want to listen back to the course again at the gym or something, you can. And then also a PDF transcript, since a lot of people learn through written word even better, so really solidifies the learning for the long haul. So you get PDF transcripts of every session. We also have some great extra bonuses in this program, all from Gregg. One is the Science is Now in Forbidden Territory, Revelations of the New Human DNA Studies. This is a brand new video. Gregg, you want to share anything about that?
Absolutely. The science, we've asked science to tell us who we are. Science is beginning to tell us who we are, and a lot of people, the scientists, don't like where the story is going. And the DNA is where the action really is. The DNA studies are what have made this course possible for me to offer now. I couldn't have offered this 5 years ago because the DNA simply wasn't there. What the scientists are actually saying now is the DNA that gives us our humanness, that gives us our uniqueness, our ability to self-regulate, is not the product of evolution as we have been led to believe through Darwin's idea of evolution. They are saying, and this is where they have to stop, they say it appears to have an intent. The fusion of the DNA, the fact that it all came together at the same time, the way it was tweaked after the fusion happened 200,000 years ago, they're saying this is more than just coincidence. There appears to be an intent underlying this, and that's where scientists have to stop because they can't tell us what the intent is. All a scientist can tell us is what happened. But that is where we're bordering on the forbidden territory. Because when we start talking about intent, it doesn't mean religion. It doesn't mean aliens, ETs, UFOs. It doesn't necessarily mean any of those things. It just means something beyond, or it could mean all those, but it means something beyond random mutations and evolution. So that's what I want to talk about in this bonus.
Fascinating. I look forward to hearing more myself.
I look forward to creating
There's also another bonus that Gregg has included is called Saving the World One Heart at a Time, the personal planetary potential of personal coherence. So this is building on the heart-brain coherence, also connects with groups like HeartMath that you're probably familiar with. And we also have one extra bonus, which is available only today. We like to do this as a little extra sweetener in the holiday spirit, get a little extra gift that when you sign up right away on the first day, you get an extra bonus for doing so. So if you go to humanbydesigncourse.com, you can see this laid out, but it's called When Science Gets It Wrong, 8 Scientific Beliefs That Shape Our World, the New Evidence That Overturns the Beliefs and What These Discoveries Mean in Our Lives Today. Provocative title and a very interesting subject, so it's going into 8 different beliefs. I mean, you don't have to go into all of them, maybe just a sneak preview there for that special bonus.
Well, today. When I put this course together, Stephen, there was only so much we could put into the 6-week course. A lot of the material, as the saying goes, it was left on the cutting room floor. And this is part of it, because so many people are relying on science of the past to guide them in their choices today. And there's so many places where science was adamant that they were correct at one point in time, and now we know that they're not. And I've already given you some examples. For example, science has been adamant that nature is based upon upon competition, conflict, struggle, and scarcity. And we believe that so much, we built an entire society around that concept. And now we know that it simply is not true. We know that nature is based upon cooperation and what biologists call mutual aid. So if that were reflected in our society, think how different our world would be, think how different our lives would look. Science has told us for over 100 years that beginning in 1888, a very famous experiment was done, the Michelson-Morley Experiment, to find out if there's a field that connects all things. And because that field was not detected in 1888, for 100 years, our science, as good as it has been based on the false assumption that everything is separate from everything else. Think about the implications. We've been taught that what we do in one place has no effect on somewhere or someone else, or someone somewhere else. And now that very same experiment was replicated by the United States Air Force in the 20th century. And guess what? The field is there, and it is there just the way it was predicted 100 years earlier. We just had better equipment to pick up that field. The Human Genome Project. It was believed that there was one gene for every protein in the human body, 100,000 proteins, so I believe we find 100,000 genes, and the pharmaceutical industry was very happy about that because that meant that there were ways to pharmaceuticals to deal with all of those. What happened in the Human Genome Project is that the Genome Project revealed that we have about the same number of genes as a worm or a fruit fly. We don't have 100,000 genes. We've got 20, maybe 23, 25,000 genes. Creating those 100,000 amino acids, what does that mean? It means that each gene has multiple functions and could do multiple things that we didn't recognize in the past. This is where it gets interesting. It's called epigenetics. We determine those functions through the environment we give the genes. Our belief systems, our thoughts, our nutrition shift those genes. And that is a big, big shift in terms of the way we've been taught to think about our bodies. Civilization is much, much older than we've been led to believe. In this bonus, I'm going to show you the archaeological evidence. Some of it I've documented personally. Technological civilizations, advanced civilizations in the last ice age with electricity, with batteries, with lights. And we were taught that it all has happened only recently in the last 300 years or so. And it leads us to the understanding that civilization is cyclic rather than linear. And the question, are we repeating the mistakes of the cycles of the past? So,
wow. You're going into you're getting further down the rabbit hole than I knew in this course. That's fantastic. Well, Gregg, I think you're absolutely brilliant and fascinating to learn from. And I know you're going to be opening up so many portals of new possibilities for people. We feel really blessed. Again, you can find all the details at humanbydesigncourse.com, humanbydesigncourse.com. You get this extra bonus, which is almost like a full course in itself when you sign up today. So I strongly encourage you to do that. So again, you get all the details at humanbydesigncourse.com, humanbydesigncourse.com. I encourage you to read through all the testimonials. People rave about Gregg because he just is always expanding the paradigm of the possible and being bravely going into some pretty more far out there territory with previous advanced civilizations. Now that's intriguing.
It changes the way we think about ourselves, Stephen. And I think the more honest, this is the thing, with science, if we could be truthful, honest, and factual about who we are and where we've come from, it informs us so we can make really good choices in our lives today for ourselves and for our children. And I think that's really where it's at. I think that's what's important.
Amen. Well, it's going to be an amazing program. You can find Human by Design at humanbydesigncourse.com. And we look forward to welcoming you into the program, and do sign up by the end of tonight so you get the extra bonus that goes deep down the many different rabbit holes with the eight different fundamental beliefs that science got wrong. So, Gregg, what a great hour with you. Any final thoughts that you want to share with folks?
I built this studio. We've got new equipment, new technology. It's going to be a very visual program so that I can share this with you in the best way, the most honoring way possible. So I want to honor you. I want to honor your time. And I appreciate you sharing your time with me. Thanks for checking this out today.
Beautiful hour. Thank you for this time. And thank you for the upcoming program, Human by Design. Check it out. Get signed up today at humanbydesigncourse.com. Thanks all. Thanks, Gregg. Blessings.